All right. Amazing. I'm starting to see people come through. Welcome all to an exciting conversation. As we're joining, why don't we do the classic? I know I just found out RevGenius covers 25 different time zones. So let's understand where you're all calling in from. I'll go first in the chat.
Look at that. Miami, Arizona, Tulum. Wow. Iowa, Portland. Hello, London.
Oh, and just a quick note, I think a lot of people's chat is showing to hosts and panelists. So feel free to change that to everyone so we can all see where you're dialing in from. There we go.
Everywhere. Wow, look at that.
Dubai.
London. Nice.
Manish Patel. Manish, I'm curious. Oh, Toronto represents. Are you going to be at B2B Forrester later, I guess, early in May? I know it's in Austin Convention Center. All right, maybe, yeah, feel free to kick us off, Elise.
Yep, this is awesome. Well, welcome world. It's so great to see everybody come around the world, from around the world and joining us today. So I really wanted to welcome you all. And today our Genius Hour webinar is with Kpi Piper and the team here from Shine RevOps as well as Synchrony. A few housekeeping items. We're talking about on scaling systems for hypergrowth companies today. As we think about this session, go ahead and please put in your questions in the chat inbox as you are already. The team here will answer them as appropriate and as time gives them as well. And then we absolutely encourage you, there will be a few polls, so please answer honestly so the team can give you valuable feedback. And then, of course, as we think about everyone's day here, we know your time is valuable. If you can't join us for the whole hour, that's okay. There will be a recording available in the next 24 hours, and I will be shooting out that email with the recording. All right. And so with that said, and without further ado, I will hand it over to Arthur to kick us off.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elise. So yeah, we're super excited to start this discussion. I think at some point, we all think of it in terms of where we want to get to, right? Hypergrowth, 40% compounded annual growth. But I think along the road there's quite a lot of hiccups that happen. So super pumped to be joined by who I see as two experts in this field. Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit what you do over at Shine Marketing?
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Arthur. Yeah. So, founder and CEO of Shine. We opened our doors in 2017. So we'll be coming up on our 5-year anniversary later this year. We started off really helping a lot of folks grow with Marketo and Salesforce. And over the years, we've started taking on new technologies, adding value to our clients by introducing them to different methods, different processes, different technologies that can help them out in their journey.
Amazing. And Molly, why don't you give us a quick intro? I won't try and butcher your last name.
No, perfect. Molly Bodensteiner. I've been in very German last name, so you would have got it. Been in, the revenue operations, revenue technology space for the last 12 years, have worked with numerous companies who have, rapidly hit hypergrowth places, and really excited to be here today. Currently the director of revenue operations at Synchrony, where we're helping organizations really better manage their uncoordinated point solutions and be able to fully scale as they hit those hypergrowth and beyond places through, really operationalized data models.
Amazing. Thank you, Molly. And for myself, Arthur Castillo over at Kpi Piper. Funny story, I actually joined RevGenius as an ambitious sales rep. And about 9 months ago, I switched over to the dark side of marketing. So currently heading up field marketing and do a lot of the work with communities like RevGenius It's amazing to see their growth. I know we're covering a wide variety of topics. When I first came in, it was sales, and now we get to talk about marketing and RevOps and CS. So super pumped to get this started. And oh, thank you, Rep Genius. One thing I will mention, just to reiterate, we do have some content that we want to share, but ultimately this is about you, the audience. I'm guessing you didn't just wake up and want to sign up for this webinar. You probably attended for some reason. So we want to see you in the chat. We want to see you in the Q&A. We'd love to even bring you up on stage if you really want to dive in deeper to your hypergrowth scaling problem. So I'll be keeping an eye out. I do have the pleasure of moderating this discussion. And I guess we can kick it off. What do you say, Molly and Steve?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So I think for when we were discussing this, obviously everybody wants to know what are the tactics and best practices and tips for hypergrowth scaling. But I think before we even get there, one thing that we were all discussing is what are some of those breaking points of like, okay, we're starting to scale. We're starting to build out our sales teams, our marketing teams, internal teams, whatever it is. Maybe we'd start off with you, Molly. Where do you see, like, in terms of a hypergrowth company, what are some of those breaking points in maybe process or tech stack that you start to see over on your end from like Synchrony?
Yeah, so even taking it a step further as an operations professional, like what are the things you just really start to feel as you're approaching, hypergrowth? One of those things is as you're hitting hypergrowth, you're going to have increased revenue goals, increased, KPIs, and a lot of that starts then with expansion. So you're going to start hiring more salespeople, CS people, starting to put more bodies into those type of roles. And as you think about that from ops, there's a different level of support you're doing as you have enablement and process and systems management. And then the other piece of this is like, as you're growing and scaling, your demand gen and your marketing programs significantly start to expand and increase. So there's kind of that feeling that comes down to the operations people while you're growing. Steve, anything to add from kind of those signals?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say just really quick, wherever there's repetition, you need process and automation. And I think that's a theme that kind of carries throughout as companies really start to grow. There's not usually a lot of emphasis on that type of stuff in the early days. But again, as you really start to find your fit in the market and you start to hire, you start to grow, just keep that in mind. That'll really help you out.
Yeah. So then, back to your original question, Arthur, like what are the things that start to break down, so from a process perspective, and I'll just ramble some pieces off, right? With rapid hiring, enablement starts to suffer. And as you're bringing more people on and trying to get them to follow a consistent process that isn't documented or doesn't live anywhere, how do you get them enabled? So as that staff increases without solid process and solid enablement, so do your inconsistencies. And then you're dependent on either going back and retroactively cleaning up these inconsistencies and more training, just what everybody wants, or putting a bunch of, things in place from a systems perspective, like wonderful Salesforce validation rules to prevent pieces of some of those process, which are still good, but it's, how do you hit those quality standards and that right enablement to follow process and also scale that. The other thing that I've thought about as I've worked in a lot of startups that have grown, if you don't have centrally accessible, like key processes, businesses rely on an individual to keep the business running, right? There's like the keeper of all things. And like, at some point that person wants to win the lottery and be able to leave. So you've got to make sure you've got your right documentation of key processes in place. They're being managed. You're staying on top of them. I mean, as you have better process maturity, you're going to spend less time gathering data. You're going to have shorter prioritization cycles, right? These are really obvious things, but from my experience, like the documentation and the process definition tends to go by the wayside a bit.
Yeah, exactly. I would even add to that, just, one of the big things that we see. So a lot of times we'll start helping out a company once they get to this heavy growth stage. A lot of times there's like a single operations professional that's trying to keep everything running smoothly, and they just get to a breaking point. A lot of it really comes down to the process the data, really just the structure overall across your different systems. And so what ends up happening is we'll see a lot of people, these are smart, professional people. They're spending hours and hours and hours each week troubleshooting, going back, trying to fix things, answering questions about why something was broken, or maybe a bad email went out to the wrong list or something like that. Those are all things that just continue to get amplified as you grow and as the pace picks up, as the volume picks up. Those things really start to get exposed. And real life, I mean, that drives people crazy. That's where you start getting into these revolving door situations for operations professionals, right? They want to be adding value to the company. They want to be reaching their goals. They want to be launching cool stuff, really like helping push the company forward, but instead they can't. And a lot of that boils down to bad data and poor system architecture.
Absolutely. It's like funny because like a business with nascent data management can still grow, right? We've seen it happens, but like that lack of clear strategy is going to inhibit process. It's going to inhibit people. It's going to wreck systems from scaling. And the thing that like I always think of things like people, process, data, technology, right? They call it like the golden triangle or, the three-legged stool, but pushing data into kind of the process piece. But one of the things, I see as, businesses scale and things is like the accessibility to operational data, right? So like, these organizations are growing, but, RevOps, key people don't actually have accessibility to the data that they need to drive operations forward and create such a huge, huge bottleneck. And the other big piece that I've experienced in other companies is the alignment on KPI definitions. So like, are you really building in kind of the manageable KPIs that you want for measurement, and everyone's aligned on that? When I say we're trying to grow active users, year over year by X%, is everyone aligned on what the definition of an active user is? And how do you really start to drive true alignment on your KPIs and your North Stars and build consistency around that? That's that whole taxonomy.
Yeah, I feel like we could do a whole session on that, like alignment of KPIs. It's really interesting. We actually had quite a few questions come in, and let's go to James's recent question here. So he asks, what are some tools you can get while small? So while you're still a small company, that scale with you during hypergrowth to make your life easier. So I know we're I guess maybe he left it vague on purpose, but anything come to mind, Steve or Molly, of like, what are some tools that you implemented right when you're, well, I guess since the beginning, that's kind of helped you scale throughout some of these phases?
Yeah, I mean, I guess without, giving a specific tool or vendor, like one of the things that I tend to think about in this is like trying to think one step ahead, right? I know if you're small, budget might be tight, but think one step ahead. Don't buy for today, buy for tomorrow, and be really purposeful on that. But the other part is like, don't buy point solutions for point in time problems, right? Really take a platform approach to what you're trying to do from a solution standpoint and manage through that. Because when you think about vendor management, tech management, the average mid-sized B2B SaaS company has like 120 plus tech tools that they're using. And not only what comes to that, from an operations perspective, I'll think firsthand, right? There's management to that. There's provisioning, there's data governance, there's integrations, there's the processes, there's understanding, the whole life cycle, but then there's renewal management and vendor management that comes to that for, 120 tools. There's definitely administrative work that comes onto that. So really think through, what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and take that platform approach. Like the last thing you want is several uncoordinated point solutions that are going to cause just a middleware nightmare.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's very, very tempting to get lured in by, those shiny new objects, and there's something new and cool every day, but really thinking about what's going to have the biggest impact and also kind of like the longest tenure, even just for example, like there's probably 15 different project management tools out there that are all pretty solid, and maybe offline we can talk about specific technologies if you want to get into some of that. But just thinking about it more from like a process, like a long-term standpoint, which project management tool is going to be the best one for you? It'll probably come down to, I don't know, 2 or 3 that are like really, really solid, and you like the interface, you like the usability, and they scale out. So just kind of making sure you go through the time to do the proper evaluation on the tools that you're looking to add on. Inevitably, you're gonna grow just in size, right? Headcount and departments, and so every team is going to be bringing on their own tools, their own kind of favorites, and things like that. Then you'll get to a point where everyone's like, "Dang, we overdid it. It's time to consolidate." Right? So think about, I guess, as Molly was saying, which tools out there even can maybe handle several different functions that serve your business instead of individual point solutions like that.
The other thing too is, have those realistic conversations of like, when you buy a new tool, right? When are you going to outgrow it? You have to know, like, there is a lifespan to things. So being really honest on like when it's going to overstretch based on the growing team and when it makes sense to adjust. The best piece of like technology procurement advice I got a long time ago is like, don't buy a tool because of a person, right? Like that's horrible advice, but you see it so often where somebody comes in and it's like they like X, Y, and Z, so they want to buy X, Y, and Z or move over from another platform, right? Like when you're at this stage of an organization, and I'll use project management as a great point that Steve brought up. If you have a tool that works and meets the needs, but somebody likes another tool better, is it worth the operational function to like migrate a PM type tool? Probably not, but so really be purposeful on you're buying a tool to meet the process and meet the needs of the process, not the needs of a specific person or people.
Oh, that's a great point. I feel like, yeah, or somebody mentioned maybe look into Synchrony.
It's a great tool.
We had a question come in through Manish Patel around lead routing. And I thought this question was great. I do want to hear from you both. I'll speak a little bit to it, Manish. So the question was, how do you manage lead routing as you scale? Lead routing is always getting more and more complex with asks from leadership in different teams. What is your approach as you scale? Super interesting, Manish. And if you're open to it, we'd love to even bring you up on stage to kind of talk this through. For us, we typically see this happen kind of around the 10 sales rep mark, where you're getting more into territories, maybe you want to route by product. So ultimately, you do have to understand how your sales team is set up. I know there's been examples where I've heard RevOps even do a discovery of, okay, they sold to doctors and practitioners, but they noticed for whatever reason, one rep actually sold better to dentists. And they ended up routing every single dental lead to this rep, and he had something like an 80% win rate. So I think ultimately is maybe a question that I often look at is, what would good look like? Just start with that. Hey, if we could come up with a concept of what does good look like, start there, and then try and understand how your sales team is set up, if you would want them routed by territory, by product, by size, whatever that is. And I think then you can start to get into it. But I feel like I've already done enough talking here. Molly and Steve, I'd love to hear, maybe we start off with you, Molly. How do you think about lead routing in particular, especially as the company grows and maybe starts outgrowing their routing logic today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, take a step back. I loved your, like, what does good look like? One of the things that I think through is like, if I can't document it, I can't build it. So really sitting with those right stakeholders and understanding, not only what the customer journey would be from a routing experience and how that should work, whether you need lead to account matching, auto conversion, where that goes to from an SDR versus, an owned account, AE type model. So really sitting down and mapping out what that process is and how that should look, and figuring out what the outliers are, right? To your point, somebody who sells better to dentists, what do those outliers? But start with good and then move to better and move to best. And, take a maturity model on it, use data to drive decisions, and make sure you have a tool that is scalable and is adaptable. One of the things when you are in a hyper growth organization, or you're scaling your sales team rapidly, you need something that's agile to be able to make those adjustments. You're going to have reps who are ramping at different times or should hit different pieces in the routing. So being able to have tools that are flexible to manage that, as well as offboarding. Somebody leaves, how do you make sure leads aren't falling through the cracks?
Yeah, I think it's got to be easy and it's got to be accurate, and thankfully we'll plug Chili Pipe right here. I've seen the tool in action. It's just super easy and clean to use for the lead routing features. And I mean, so part of me just is constantly thinking about automation, right? Like you can map stuff out in Excel, but you can't really afford to like have someone manually reference an Excel sheet, update the complex logic in Salesforce, and then do that, on the fly, right? So you really need to think about at volume, at scale, what's the right process to be able to make those changes after you guys have met up and discussed, what's our new routing model going to look like, who gets what goes where, that kind of thing. Just being able to, yeah, again, have a tool that's easy to use and accurate.
No, it's great. And Manish, like I would love to hear some follow-ups because I know you mentioned maybe leadership and other departments were trying to get their say at this, which I think adds a very interesting variable. Typically, I guess it's more marketing, operations, sales that are involved in this. So I'd be curious to hear what you're getting on that end. Really quick before we get into Nikki's question, which I think is really interesting. I guess we had another Nikki question. He says, Molly, can you recommend a platform for the bow tie data model that a business can integrate in their stack? Hopefully that makes sense to you because this sounds like a different language to me, Molly.
Yeah, so you're looking like how you're bringing everything kind of together, centralized, like input and output. I mean, without plugging Syncery, I think that's something that we do really well from a unified data model and keeping, a single source of truth across your platforms. But obviously, there's several tools out there, and I don't want to self-servicely promote where I work. I want to keep this agnostic, but as you're thinking through inputs and outputs, how do you build a unified data platform and you're making sure you're sharing the same data across all of your systems? So again, you think about things like routing and other decision points, right? It's that consistency and that unified model that really drives that 360 experience.
Yeah, and I'll chime in there. So, we've seen customers use a number of different tools to integrate their tech stack, and it's cool that that's even an option these days. I feel like 5-10 years ago, you had to get a team of developers and build all these custom integrations, and it just wasn't point and click the way it is today. So the fact that it's even available and people are starting to think about it, I think is a really good sign. With that being said, I have seen a lot of point solutions where there's overlapping features that kind of do the same thing, but they do it a little bit differently. And so my advice there would be think about the big picture. I guess, as you put it, kind of the bow tie in your data model. Think about, can you afford to integrate systems and move data around without cleaning it and normalizing it and making it standard, right? Does that really add a ton of value, or does that just kind of solve a certain integration issue that you're looking at? So for me, just, based on the different clients we've worked with and the different, sources that they're moving data into, can you guys move on without like a proper data management piece really tying everything together? Because you can make integrations happen now. I mean, all the way from Zapier up to whoever else, right? Like there's a ton of people that you can integrate your technology. I think for us, since we see a lot of marketing campaigns going out the door, we see people wanting to do ABM, they want personalization at scale, they want all this stuff, but then their data doesn't fully support it. So you might have a database full of people with all caps in their first name. And so if you're putting an email with a first name token in there, it looks like you're getting yelled at, right? Nobody really wants to receive that message, or their first name is empty, or their company is misspelled, or anything like that. That's the type of thing that it kind of puts a pin in your personalization efforts. It ruins kind of your marketing efforts when you're doing it at scale, and you don't always catch it because you're not looking through rows and rows and rows of your database. You just kind of assume it's good, and you get to a point where either you trust your data and it's good, or you have your doubts and you don't really trust it, and then that kind of leads to some other problems there. So I would just say, again, just keep an eye on the big picture.
No, it's great advice, Steve and Molly. So we did have an interesting question here from Nikki. I'll keep an eye on the chat. Either way works for me. Cool. Let's get you on stage then, Nikki. I don't want to steal all your thunder and assume. Let me find you an attendees here so you can give us a little bit more context to your situation.
Hello.
Hi, Nikki. Am I sounding better now, by the way? I think you called me up.
Yeah. It's awesome. And it's a great mic, so I was surprised. Thanks for bringing me on. And yeah, I believe that my questions is a little niche, so I don't want to take up too much time. But I am moving over into a new role. I'm about 40 days in. And I'm the first field marketing hire at my company. They've done a variety of events and activations over the last 6-7 years, but we've gone from 86 employees to now 200. And yeah, so really fast growing company. But I am finding myself just kind of all over the map on where my strategy should lie. We are still seeking out a CMO. So we also don't have a solid vision right now with how our product needs to be positioned. So I have all the sales and BDR, great folks coming to me with all kinds of ideas, right? So just my strategy so far is doing a lot of testing and learning, right? That's part of being in the field, but thinking through just entry level experiences is taking like maybe just a small experience at a trade show, 10 by 10 booth, thinking about how our ICP shows up, gaining a lot of information. But I also have sales reps who are like, no, we need to pick a couple opportunities where we know our ICPs are and just go big or go home. So I'm just curious. I know, Arthur, you're a field marketing guy. I would be curious what your initial thoughts are being a first field marketing hire for hypergrowth company.
Yeah. I was going to say, Nikki, this is like so perfect because I feel like I went through similar growing pains, and I feel like I can say this, I guess, because I was a sales rep, but sales reps, they feel like they have an opinion on everybody's job and position. So you'll continue to get that. Hopefully you can weed out the good suggestions from the bad ones. But for me, I actually pitched somewhat of a loose plan around 3 pillars of what I wanted to do in field marketing. I knew a big one was this idea of like branding or dark social, and that's a lot of the stuff that I do in the community. And I wanted to pitch on that because that's probably some of the hardest stuff to attribute. But going into the role, I wanted to see how my CEO looked at it, how my manager looked at it, because I think we're seeing more and more the importance of dark social, and a lot of the buying conversations and triggers that happen aren't attributable, right? So that makes it pretty tough for field marketing. I think the other thing, I'll speak from my own experience. I guess we made an interesting shift, Nikki, to field marketing because you could say in the past 2 years, they're probably struggling quite a bit because there wasn't any in-person conferences or anything like that. So we made the quick decision to say, hey, I'm sure large conferences are going to exist, but let's actually double down on micro events and like executive dinners. It seemed like people had more of an appetite for that. They'd be willing to go to that. So that's something like I knew going into field marketing that I wanted to double down on this. And I also felt like it was a good way to actually get other departments involved within Chili Piper. So I figured, okay, sales reps would want to potentially send mid-funnel opportunities to these dinners. SDRs could add this as a toolkit as well to say, hey, rather than knocking on someone's door asking for a demo, hey, these are a group of your peers in San Francisco that are all meeting to have an executive dinner. Would you want to jump in on these? So it's a loaded question, and happy to talk offline, Nikki, but I think part of it was one thing I've learned early on is you really do have to work very cross-functionally across all departments. I needed account managers and CSMs to make sure they're introing me to their points of contacts if I needed a customer to do a case study or speak at an event. I needed sales to send people to some of these in-person events, obviously even within marketing to make sure we're on track with them. So I feel like a lot of the groundwork I set up is almost, let's get as many ideas as possible from these departments to understand how they're thinking about my function. And then from there, maybe I can come back to them and say, hey, I heard you. This is what I heard from other departments, and this is how I'm thinking about it. So try and make it as collaborative as possible. But yeah, happy to take this offline. I want to hear some pieces of advice from Steve and Molly. So why don't we kick it off to you, Steve? Any advice for first field marketing hire?
For field, oh, taking me back. So my very first job out of college way back when was not glorious, but it was doing data management, and we worked closely with the field team and the SDR team and a lot of folks there. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think this really for me hits on just kind of that personalization aspect. This also kind of hits on, yeah, your ICP, you know, maybe even part of like your ABM efforts where you're really targeting like your key moneymaker top accounts. And I think what you said, Arthur, makes a lot of sense. What do people have an appetite for these days? You know, I know just what even last year, I think sporting events finally got people back in, and, you know, we're starting to see some of those functions pick back up again. We've seen Sendoso just go crazy with all their, you know, all the swag and stuff that you can send, you know, to different people at different times. And so for me, I'm kind of thinking about the customer journey, just overall. For sure, if you guys are having an event or you're having a booth and then sales is like, hey, we want to talk to these people right away. I think just for me, big picture is like, okay, what are the activities leading up to the event, during the event, and then after the event to really make those people feel like warm and welcomed and kind of part of your brand. One thing I remember hearing a long time ago was like, ask them for questions, ask them for product feedback, you know, make them kind of feel like they have the spotlight on them, and just kind of bring them in almost like they're part of the team. So sorry, I don't have a ton of super relevant field experience, but that's what I got for you.
Awesome, Steve. Anything to add, Molly? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give just really obvious and practical experience, like feedback. And I think you're probably thinking about this, but really be purposeful on what you're defining as success here and why you're doing what you're doing and what you're hoping to achieve from it, especially with the lack of having a CMO and, you know, still having some flush and where the vision and strategy lie, just being really, really purposeful on, you know, what you're hoping to accomplish and how you're defining success for these tactics, especially if you're doing more experimentation too. So setting those right expectations.
Great. I
Nikki,
appreciate the insights.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it sounds like you are joining maybe a pretty, I think you mentioned RevOps or a very data-driven team. I know for us, we didn't even really have any data on any of the events we did or anything like that. So it was a lot of experimentation. If they can even help and point you in the right direction, say, hey, this is where we've had the most success at events in the past, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I like that. I have found that we have a lot of success can be, we had a great time, which is good, right? But hopefully I can, translate that into specific accounts or, you know, dollars moving into this year, because I've had a great time. I haven't seen a lot of connection to conversations with clients, but maybe refining my questions a little bit more on, what kind of content maybe resonated the most, or what kind of situations did our ICP tend to be more comfortable? Yeah, I like those like planning questions that you're saying.
And figuring out how you can remove emotion from some of the qualification and that feedback too, right? Yeah, we had a great time. Yeah, but you know, what happened next, or did it meet what we needed it to as well? Or you'll sometimes get feedback from events where people are like, oh yeah, it wasn't great. But then when you start to look at the data, you're like, actually it was. So how do you really balance both of those pieces of feedback?
I was also going to add, Nikki, without knowing too much about where you work, I think something that was important to me, especially with the rise of communities and dark social, is where is maybe your ICP and your buyer getting information today? Try and understand that, maybe around certain communities, maybe it's around big research firms or publications. Once you understand that, I would try and do as many events as possible around where they get their sources of information, because they're going to look to that as almost like a source of truth. So if they start to even associate your brand with, oh my God, yeah, and Gartner comes to mind, I don't know, and you're starting to do events there, that's like, okay, I'm already going there as your ICP for information. And if you can somehow tie your brand, maybe educate me a little bit more on the problem you solve. That's one question I would ask. Where's your ICP typically getting their information today? Might not be as easy to solve, but I think you can interview customers, different things like that. Yeah, and Nikolaev, hopefully I'm saying that right, mentioned SparkToro is great to let you know where your ICP gets info from. So I believe they even have a freemium product that you can start to look.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming up on stage and asking the question. I know it can be tough sometimes. So thank you for that. I loved Candace's question that had come in. And Candace, let me know if you do want to put a little bit more context on this. We can bring you up on stage as well. But to scroll back, she mentioned we've acquired a few companies and now we need to condense our tech stacks, Salesforce being the biggest one. Where do you advise to start? So Steve, Molly, I know this is your neck of the woods. Would love to hear a company that's starting to acquire. Where do they even start in terms of consolidating that tech stack?
Oh man, yeah, this was literally where I spent a recent year of my life, of a company that acquired 4 other companies and working to bring everything together. Really, again, it's going to sound obvious, right? But you've got to start with, what are you trying to accomplish by bringing this together, right? Is the goal of bringing, maybe that's actually, Candace, that's a question for you too. Maybe if you want to jump in, but like, what's the goal in this, right? Is that we're consolidating because we're going to combine products, combine platforms, like bring that unified piece up, what single sales team, goal to be one platform. Perfect. That's great. Because I think that starts to drive, should you consolidate or should you not? So working to get that single view of customer. So when you're considering how to consolidate, right, you've got to look at the process. Like how is this going to work? What are the key processes? How are people going to interact with the tech stack, right? Doing the tool evaluation. Are we using the right tools to support those processes that we have defined? Will they scale with us? The fun piece. And then getting down to like true tax of like the data behind it, right? That's where understanding the data dictionary, the relationships, what the data means across these platforms, and figuring out how you're going to consolidate those data points to get to that unified model, right? Because it's not as easy. Anyone who's done a Salesforce to Salesforce migration of a single platform knows that it's not a lift and shift, right? There's a lot of work that needs to go down and truly setting up what those relationships are, how the data needs to work, what it needs to model as, how do you align that to either existing processes or new processes, depending on the business piece, and then truly going live with it and enabling on it. Steve, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, anytime there's acquisitions and you're dealing with platform migrations, and those are always monsters. So really ironing out what the process is going to look like going forward is probably one of the first steps that you'll want to take, because you're going to have different teams that are used to different ways of doing things. And if one team has to completely move over to this new way, there's probably going to be some grumpy people about it. If there's like a collaboration and there's kind of this, hey, this worked for us, this worked for us, these are things that didn't work, okay, let's move forward, then I think you're going to be in a much better place. The other part is going to be the data. So simple enough, if again, you're going through an acquisition, you're working with at least 2 different databases, I'm sure with plenty of overlap. And so you want to be very careful about how you actually consolidate that data into your CRM and your marketing automation system and all of your other platforms, so you don't create duplicates, you don't overwrite bad data. You also probably will find really kind of how messy some of the data is. Once you get to that stage, you'll kind of peel back the curtain and you'll see, all right, we exposed some things over here and we exposed some things over there that we don't really want going forward. So take it as an opportunity to really clean your data and establish some process around that. Because if you have that as part of your foundation, and then you start merging all of your systems and everything together, then you're going to leave behind a whole world of pain if you really focus on that up front. If not, it's just going to manifest, it's going to slow things down, it's going to make all those activities to come just really painful. You'll probably experience delays and all kinds of mistakes in your marketing campaigns, probably have lead routing issues. And so just don't rush it, really give it the time it deserves to get it right.
The other thing to think about too is, what history do you need to keep from these legacy systems, and how do you make sure, even if that's not something you're surfacing up directly in the new platform, whether that's the incumbent and you're combining into one or you're starting fresh, but how do you retain and store that history, especially if you need it in the future to be able to make decisions, right? Most people generally aren't like, yep, just start scratch, wipe it all. Typically there's some retention that you want to have, but you want to also have meaningful retention and be able to leverage the data when you need it, and not have to run a bunch of SQL queries and bring in IT resources to help surface it up.
Yeah, these are fantastic questions. I was going to mention earlier, Nicola, I think based on some of your questions, it might be worth checking into Syncery. And Candace, I don't want to ruin Steve's thunder, but I think it might be worth a conversation too. And I know Steve's going to give away something to attendees here at the end, but we'll just tease that out for now. But thank you all for these questions. It's I know Nicholas Gollop mentioned, and maybe this is something you want to speak to, Molly, the biggest challenge becoming one platform is getting all the data converge. And this is really hard to get done fully across the board, even using top-notch systems. So from what my understanding, Molly, I know Syncery touches on this somewhat. Do you kind of resonate with what Nicholas is mentioning there? Or what are some of those challenges to like converge data across all of these platforms?
Right, like just building that unified data model, right? I mean, definitely is a challenge, right? Because it takes thought behind things. We're so ingrained in, point-to-point solutions and one-to-one, but once you add that third in the mix, you've got to look at, how does this data come together? How is it defined? What does it mean? And what's that source of truth, right? And how do you make sure what you're bringing in, you're also pushing out in a meaningful way through, multi-directional sync, which is kind of a different concept than most people are thinking about, right? For so long, it's just been that bi-directional sync between platforms. And now with Syncery, you're bringing it together from multi-directional platforms. So you're really keeping things aligned and unified. And again, you start with the data, but you have to have that understanding of the data and what that means, and take a data first mindset to really build out those experiences and that definition.
No, that's great, Molly. And you did teach me something. I am familiar with bidirectional sync. I'm happy to say that my operations speak reaches that, but I did not hear about what did you call it?
Multi-directional syncing, right?
Multi-directional syncing. That sounds like what a lot of people need in this case based on the questions coming in. So definitely something to look into. Cool. Thank you all, everybody, for some of these questions. I know we're coming up on the end here. So we've obviously identified a lot of the issues, and people are asking about some of the challenges that they have as well. But maybe if we can go into a little bit more on the tactical tips of, okay, now that we've identified some of these challenges that exist while we're scaling at a hypergrowth pace, anything comes to mind that we can share maybe with our audience here on things that, okay, we've identified these problems, what can we do now about it so we don't keep running into the same issues, try and be as proactive versus reactive as possible?
Yeah, I'll kick us off with a few. So a lot of what we talked about kind of boils down to data, right? So one thing to realize is that data gets messy quick, especially as you scale. And that's really why you need to start prioritizing data quality and data governance. You can start small with things like weekly data health reports. These can be dashboards that you build either in your CRM or automation platforms or anything that touches that, your BI tool. Just really try to take an ongoing snapshot of how healthy is your database. And we can talk through later, like different types of reports that would feed those dashboards, different data points to look at. Molly earlier mentioned like data validation rules in Salesforce. It's simple, it's there, it's a standard feature. Everyone should be using them. That's part of kind of the broader topic of locking down your data input sources. In our world, a lot of times we see people importing lists into their CRM and their automation platforms, and there's no governance whatsoever. So you'll get just incomplete data, you'll get messy data, you'll get all kinds of bad stuff that you can't really sweep it under the rug forever. And so having like a list upload template is one simple trick that people can use. There's a lot more to it. I'm sure Molly has a lot more to say. I'll leave one more kind of Twitter, LinkedIn quote here. So I would say that when your systems shine, your people shine. And so it's really important, I think, that, you know, people start focusing on quality and governance of their data.
Yeah, I love that too, Steve. And the thing that I'm thinking about that is like, you know, we talked about this earlier, is like, if you're hiring strong people, you want them in here who are, you know, building things that are moving the business forward, not exporting Excel spreadsheets and loading things through data loader to fix their data, right? That's not the best use of their time, but that's generally where a lot of ops professionals are guilty of spending their time, because they're putting out that fire or trying to fix things and not spending time, you know, on the root cause and really putting better infrastructure in place when it comes to data. So one of my big tips and tricks, like when you're thinking about growing, is like understand where you're spending your time, right? Especially ops professionals. And I think we're guilty of running. There's always a million things for us to do. Like, take a step back and understand where you are spending the majority of your time and why you're spending your time there, you know. And how you cannot spend time on repeat tasks is huge. And, you know, there's a good rule of thumb of like, what should you automate versus not automate, but spend the time understanding how much time, I'm saying time a lot here, but where you're spending it. You know, one of the things at a hypergrowth company I was at years ago was onboarding and offboarding employees, right? So from a CS and a sales perspective, like getting access to systems, implementing them in the routing, reassigning records. You know, if you have that clear process and you understand, you know, how territory assignments need to work, when they need to work, like, you shouldn't spend hours every week reloading territories through CSVs through data loader, right? You should have a system that's managing that for you and is smart enough to help you scale that. So that would be, you know, the tip and trick of understanding where you're spending the time and invest in automating where it makes sense. You know, another tip and trick, like thinking about scale and where you're going for, is like, figure out, you know, how you can run without IT support too. That's been another big bottleneck that I've ran into, is when, you know, IT owns things and you're using, you know, platforms that require development. On top of that, you might not have the skill set to support, and having to manage, you know, oh, Apex code change, like that's going to take 2 weeks because I've got to get, you know, either a contractor or a vendor to support this because I don't have the right resources here. So look for tools that allow for true like citizen development, low code, no code, that really allow you to run and scale as your business is growing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you both for that. I know I saw, as you were talking, Rebecca Buchanan had a question. So looks like her org has grown from 4 employees to 20 in the past 6 months. They're in the process of transitioning from multiple systems connected with Zapier to more of an all-in-one platform. Any other points I should be considering? Any tips in being proactive to set up clean data in the new system? Somewhat of a loaded question, but I'm sure you both have come across instances like this where it's hacked together and connected with Zapier and they're trying to become more all-encompassing. What's something that Rebecca's not thinking about that maybe we can help her out as she goes on this journey?
Yeah, Rebecca, I'd love to share some of this work that, you know, I've built within our just Syncery platform to help this. You know, I was a user of Zapier for a long time, right? But there's a lot of challenges that come into that platform in terms of, you know, truly scaling and moving forward and how it manage transactions and data management. I'm going to just tell you there's definitely a better way, especially as you continue to grow. It's a good platform to start, but it's going to run into some challenges down the line as you try to be more advanced, you know, because, right, it's a point to point. So figuring out how to work off of that centralized data model is going to be huge as you continue to grow and manage data across multiple platforms.
Steve, anything to add there?
I would just say, make sure that not only do you focus on kind of shoring up your data once you kind of move off of Zapier, but maintain it. It's never just done, right? So just kind of build it into your schedule, get some other teammates involved that can help, keep an eye on just your data as it grows, your input sources as they come online, and just make sure you maintain it, because if you went from 5 to 20, you're probably going to double up again in a year or less, which means there's just going to be more hands in your systems, more sources for data. So do everything you can to just maintain a clean database going forward.
Awesome. So Rebecca says, thank you both to that. Casey had a pretty interesting question. I think it spun up from some of your recommendations, Molly. So she says, no code tools can be a double-edged sword because they're not as customizable as some of the more robust systems that require developers. And she's wondering, are there any examples of scaled companies that use no code tools? Any come to mind for you, Molly or Steve?
Yeah, let me think on that too. And part of it's like, you're probably never going to get away from not having code ever in a system or a platform, right? I mean, that's just inevitable, but figuring out the right places for when you need code and when you don't need code, and what they're housing, right? So things that are, more evergreen in nature and pretty stable, like putting code behind those makes sense. But things that are rapidly evolving and changing, and you're going to make adjustments to on the fly, having that code base is a challenge unless you have the right resources. I'm trying to think through, I can't name a company that has no code in any of their platforms, but I have worked with companies that definitely take more of a no code approach to what they're doing from a scalability standpoint, specifically in their go-to-market stack.
Yeah, if you need custom development constantly, you're not going to be able to keep up with all the demand, all the growth that you're seeing. So to Molly's point, just where to deploy those developer resources, what integrations or systems or things require that, level. Plus, from a business perspective, those are expensive resources. You don't necessarily want them, spending their time on things that could be solved through a platform or through something that's, repeatable, right?
And I laugh because there's been, some integrations we've used heavy base code tools, spent, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars in an enterprise company of implementing, only for them, by the time we were said and done, ready to switch vendors and start all over again. So, thinking through, like, how do you get up and running quickly? How do you adapt and adjust in a meaningful way, and, truly have a platform that you can manage without IT resources? I mean, it's just huge from an ops perspective.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you for asking that. I think they have become all the rage, and I'm sure for a good reason, but definitely double-edged sword, as I believe it was Casey who put it. Oh, perfect. Rev Genius, you're already plugging it. This is why we love working with you all. So we would love to hear from all of you here. As you see, they just put in the chat all of our LinkedIns. We would love to connect with you all. Now, I did tease a little special something from Steve over at Shine Marketing. So I think there's been some great questions so far. Would highly recommend that you guys take advantage of Steve and his team over at Shine Marketing. They're going to do a free RevOps system health check. So what we can do, if you have your smartphone on you, which I know 96% of us sleep with this thing next to us, so you probably have it on you. Feel free to scan this right here. This is going to take you directly to Steve's spicy booking link, and you can book some time with him for that free RevOps health systems check. So yeah, a lot of those questions coming in on data, and I'm scaling pretty quick. Definitely seems like it's worth a conversation with Steve and his team. I know they're going to look after you, but I guess it's time to wrap up. Molly, Steve, any last minute thoughts on this topic, or anywhere else that they can find a little bit more about you both?
No, closing thoughts, yeah, I'll kick off here, and feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Would love to stay connected. Would love to chat more about some of these pieces that people are, running into.
And then for those that,
Sorry about that.
it's okay. Just like we can have hiccups in our data, it also happens to us live when we're speaking to, right? So yeah, Steve, any last minute parting thoughts? And by the way, for those of you that didn't happen to have your cell phone there, I dropped a link in the chat to Steve's booking link. But sign us off here, Steve. What do you got?
Yeah, just, you can find me on LinkedIn too. Obviously, grab some time on my calendar with that link. You can reach out to me. I'm always down for a conversation. The whole foundation of Shine in general is just to really help people learn and grow, and that's what we do well. So we'd love to carry the conversation on. Thank you all for taking some time with us today. It was really fun. Thanks for having us, Rev Genius, and yeah, this was awesome.
Love the questions and the participation. So this is great.
Yeah, this is awesome. So keep an eye out. We definitely want to continue serving the RevOps community, the Rev Genius community. Love the engagement. And for those of you, we will send you the recording in a follow-up, as well as some additional information. But as Steve, Molly, and now myself are saying, we're happy to answer any follow-up questions. Nikki Frank, I'm looking at you, first-time field marketing hire. Let's definitely connect. But thank you all. I'll leave you here with 3 minutes to catch your next meeting. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.